Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our live office hours, Talent and Transformation. We have a fantastic program ready for you this morning, depending on your time zone, or afternoon if you're with us on Eastern. My name is Amanda. I am on the marketing team here at JM&A Group. I'll be your moderator, and joining me today are Kevin, Brian, and Matt. Just for a quick overview of the flow for today's office hours, we have some awesome conversation that our panelists have planned for you. And towards the end, we will offer up a free resource for your digital transformation called 6 Obstacles to Successful Digital Transformation. And at the end, we'll have that opportunity to have a sign up for one-on-one conversations with Kevin. So guys, if you would introduce yourselves, we can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. My name is Kevin Hall. I work with JM&A, and I manage our dealer talent services practice. So my role is to support our 3,800 rooftops across the country in all things talent. And then Brian. Yep.
My name is Brian Kramer. I'm the general manager at Germain Toyota Naples. I've been in the car business 26 years, and I'm just appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel.
And I'm Matt Pepsel. I'm with Predictive Index, and I run our professional services team, and I work with thousands of clients all across the globe, and I'm very happy to be with you today.
Thanks, everybody. One last piece of housekeeping. If you do have questions for our panel, they are ready to take them. So please go ahead and drop your questions on the right-hand side. You'll see a questions tab. Feel free to put something in there, and we will route it to the team as it comes in. Other than that, Kevin, go ahead and take it away. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, Amanda. We appreciate you. Matt and Brian, I'm so excited for this conversation. And I want to start first with just defining digital transformation. And Brian, I know you are knee deep in this transformation at your store. And I'd love to hear how you define digital transformation and some of the things that your team is working on to kind of meet the needs of the current customer.
Well, I would say, a lot of people define it as digital retailing, or they have different modern retailing. I think that the best way to say it is just it's wherever the customer wants to purchase, however they want to purchase, making it as easy as it possibly could be for them to purchase. If it's at their house, if it's virtually, if it's in the showroom, or any combination in between. There's no, I used to think there was a defined, clear, linear path, but it's not the way the consumers behave. And I don't think in the age of Instacart and Apple and all these other omni-channel retailers, Walmart Plus, that there is one way of digital transformation. It's basically just eliminating friction, not just for your staff, but also for your associates, and making it easier by reducing friction for both.
Yeah, makes sense. And Matt, when you lead at Predictive Index, you all are the pioneers in a talent optimization framework, which we're showing here today, which really helps organizations not only with the digital transformation or the people strategy, or aligning that digital transformation to the people strategy. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and kind of where this philosophy came to work.
Yeah, I mean, the company's been around since 1955, and in that long period of time, we've had a chance to work with businesses of all sizes and varieties, and coming back to the fact that many times the strategy and the strategic intent wasn't being fulfilled. We wouldn't see the business results. In a framework like this, you start a period like, let's say you're on a calendar fiscal January, business strategy is in place, but then by the time the end of the fiscal, business results aren't there. And we came to find out it's really because of the people part in the middle. Every sort of aspect of the business flows through our people. So what we started to do is to say, well, let's deconstruct that a little bit. What are the things that every leader of every organization, every team, regardless of size, has to do? We talk about designing winning teams, hiring top talent, inspiring employees to greatness, and diagnosing the people problems that are affecting the business. And that really became a way of thinking about really all types and functions of business. In digital transformation specifically, now that strategy is very sound. To Brian's point, this is how people want to buy. But are we going to get the result we want? Are we going to get the level of profitability, the sell-through? That's going to come down to how well we manage that transformation through our people and through those existing teams.
That's awesome. And Brian, you're again being one of the leaders in this space. How have you looked at your people, and what have you learned about your transformation at your store and the role that people play in it?
So I think that it's about looking at the entire dynamic of the team, and you can't just have a cookie cutter approach to having all the exact same people and everybody with the same mindset. You've also got to have some innovators in every capacity, sales, service advisors, the BDC, managers, everywhere in between, where there's a champion that you can utilize to prove and break through that glass ceiling to prove that something's possible. Because the natural tendency, just as human beings and the way the brain works, is to resist change, especially right now. Everybody's so profitable and everything's working so well. Why would you change anything, right? But it's more about looking, a year from now, 2 years from now, or even if we go back to the beginning of COVID, the way that we're currently doing it, is that the way that we would have done it then? Or is that the way that we'll be doing it 2 years from now? And right now is the time to reinvest in your staff, solidify your infrastructure, and make sure that they've got the tools, because the tide's up right now and everybody looks, great, but it's, and it probably is going to be a while, right? So there's time, but that tide's going to go back out, and you'll see who was living in a straw house versus a house made out of bricks when that comes through.
Yeah. And you mentioned something interesting, that these champions have some tendencies that you've seen. They tend to be the innovators, the explorers, individuals that are comfortable taking that risk. Matt, in your experiences, have you seen that in the data and the science? Have you seen that to be true, that these explorers or that these innovators are really good champions for some of these initiatives?
Yeah, yes and no. I think what's great about certain personality types is they're very venturesome. They're not uncomfortable with uncertainty at all. They're like, let's do it. Let's lean into this thing. And that's a really great quality during times of change. But if those are our people who are in charge of different types of teams who are configured very differently from them, maybe people who are a little bit more process and precision guided by protecting the organization from risk, that can be a real conflict inside of an organization. What I like to say is that it's almost like a balance beam, if you will. On one side, you've got trust and transparency. Those are two really key things you want during a time of transformation. And on the other side, you've got time. So when trust and transparency are high within a given organization, its culture, then you can go faster. But if trust and transparency are low, it's going to take a lot longer to get that change through the system. So that's where, when you see differences of personality type, those venturesome people, if they just go too fast, they may leave some people in the dust.
Brian, have you experienced that? I know we were talking before this call that really resonated with you. So give us some examples of where you experienced that and how you worked through it.
Well, I can tell you, Matt just hit the nail on the head. And, here at our organization, we say that trust is the WD-40 that allows, it's like a lubricant and it's not, the opposite of that is obviously rusting, and makes it much harder to open a door. And as fast as you want to go is you can only rise to the level of trust that you've built. And that's the foundational principle. That's a non-negotiable condition of employment here with our core values. And it's not just some, poster on the wall. We live it and breathe it, and it's something we're not willing to tolerate to the point of where we're willing to terminate over it, regardless of performance. It's that important, because if not, you can't go that fast. But to answer your question, I've personally been in that situation where I'm going so fast, I've mapped everything out in my head, but maybe I haven't put it in writing. I haven't communicated it out to everybody. And to both your points, everybody goes at a different speed. And you've got the one, I've got half of my staff that guards the process, wraps their arms around it. I've got to give them a little bit more clarity. I can't sit there and just say, here, let's just do that. Now, again, I got a little more trust, but I also have to not violate that and not take advantage of it to where I'm making too many withdrawals without putting deposits back in. I've got to allow them opportunities to poke holes in everything, and everybody moves at a different speed. And that chemistry, that all the ingredients in that recipe, I think, are critical in order to make the whole, the ingredients in that recipe are critical to make it all work.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. You mentioned something that really resonates with me. It's this relationship currency, right? And that trust is the main currency in that in that bank. And if you don't put enough money into your bank account with that specific relationship, when you push and when you go hard or you go fast, or you make a mistake, you may withdraw too much than you have, and there's some penalties with that. And so I love that analogy around trust and the currency of a relationship. It's super important for a transformation. Matt, through your experiences, what have you seen around conflict in a transformation? To Brian's point, there are a lot of things that potentially could cause some friction if trust isn't there. How do you go about designing a team around what the transformation is trying to achieve? And in the digital world, right, it's to meet the customer where they want to be. And then ultimately the result is profitability and higher CSIs, right? That's really what we're battling for. So how would you approach that and give some tips to our audience?
Yeah, I think if there's a foundation and a certain amount of trust in the organization, then all of a sudden things can go pretty well. Conflict isn't something that we have to avoid because it's going to be done respectfully, constructively, and it's even necessary when you're making changes. Because if I'm in an organization I'm leading, I don't have all the details, right? I need people to push back on me respectfully, constructively, so I make sure that we're accounting for all the different perspectives. And so that's why trust is really important, because you're going to need it. It's like that bank account, like you talked about. You make those deposits because now during times of change, that's when you're going to draw on that. And then the reason I think that people follow a leader like Brian in your example is because you're a straight shooter. You're giving people the information. They want you to be truthful with them. You don't feel like, well, what are you not telling me, right? Those are the types of leaders that you don't want to follow because you're not sure you're getting the whole information. Like you can take the challenging news of something's going to change, something I'm used to is going to change, but you want to be very clear about the motivation behind it. And so I think that's where transparency helps to create more trust.
Yeah. And it's interesting, it's in this transformation, not only are we changing the customer experience, but Brian, you and I have had this conversation a lot, is we're also changing the experience of our associates. And that experience is different. Therefore, potentially the people that we're hiring to deliver the customer experience is different. Have you seen that through your store and your transformation?
100%. And a lot of times, unless you stop sawing and you stop to sharpen the blade, and I do it with, an associate right after we have an upset customer, I don't sit there and beat on them. I ask them exactly, which is probably worse for them, but I take them in a forensic study of exactly what happened step by step. Is it a software issue? Is it a clarity issue? Is it an expectations issue? And to both of your points, if you don't have trust, you have artificial harmony, which is extremely toxic. And then you have a lack of attention to results, just like the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And that's not only is it a waste of time, but it causes all this frustration, because if your staff doesn't understand all those elements, they don't know why you're doing the things that you're doing. And there's so much unnecessary friction that we put on associates with forms that are redundant, that don't need to be completed. And by eliminating so much of that friction for them, you essentially are reducing it for the customer in a downstream fashion.
Yeah. And you have seen when hiring or promoting or training new skills that the traditional model aligns, or you're looking for different skills today in a digital model, right? The traditional sales model versus the digital model. Are you seeing differences in behavioral traits or tendencies that you're focused on?
Yes, and we staff everybody, so we've got a showroom floor team, which is our smallest team, because we do it based on the data. Where's the sourcing coming from? Internet is obviously the biggest. We've got an equity sales team, but we also don't try to reinvent the wheel. If based on the profile and then talking to the associates, sometimes we just have a square peg in a round hole. We just move somebody from sales to service, and we do it the opposite way. And sometimes we've got somebody in the internet department, that's not their strong suit. They're better being on the service drive, talking to people face to face. A lot of people don't like doing that. So they're more of a farmer, and they like to, harvest it back in the, the sales BDC. And I think that figuring out that, and also aligning them with the right leadership by having, their behavioral profiles and being able to match it up, because having somebody who's a intense driver with no patience versus somebody that does have patience, that's going to follow people longer and be able to have a different set of skills that to offset that, the other people on the other team. Not if you don't have a manager that looks at the world the same way, or can't empathize or sympathize where that person's coming from, the odds of turnover are going to be more likely, and vice versa.
Yeah. And it's funny, we were talking about this, and Matt and I were chatting about this, but in this labor market shortage, right, it could put you behind significantly your timeline, your customers' expectations in this transformation. It is hard to find people in general. And so keeping your people and aligning your people is mission critical for a successful transformation. Matt, what some of the stats and some of the data that you all have on this, how important is this? And do you see the trends of the labor shortages loosening, or do you think this is something that's going to continue for a lot of our dealerships?
I think it's going to continue. I think we've seen as many as 40%, maybe a little bit more, are open to looking for new opportunities. So if their change process isn't being handled well, or if they think they can do better somewhere else, they just might. But I think it's not a doom and gloom story. What I'm really encouraged by in auto retail is that you have a lot of different variety of jobs coming in now. So with the digital transformation, Gen Z workers, for example, might choose to come into the shop, and then all of a sudden, now they don't necessarily know what they're all about or what they're into. They just don't have that career experience. But now there's flexibility. So let's say you hire somebody who's got a great work ethic. They love the product and the industry. They're a good team player. But, Brian, to your point, maybe they started off in internet and they want to be on the sales floor. Well, that's great. They have that flexibility, or vice versa. There's new types of jobs that are available to these promising young people who just didn't know what job they were applying for. But once they're in, now there's places we can put them, and we can build a dream team in that process. That would have been possible before those types of jobs really showed up and dealers looked at, in the old way.
Yeah, that's interesting.
There's one other byproduct that goes along with what Matt just said, and it's, as automation continues and there becomes a lot more of this stuff with artificial intelligence and a lot more things that are happening along that route, you can really offset somebody's profile by somebody who's not highly detailed. When you can automate a lot of the paperwork, let's use finance for, obviously a JM&A, podcast. So in F&I, if you can automate, which we've been able to do, a lot of the CITs and the contracts in transit, you can now take people that maybe weren't the most detailed, that are great at selling, great at connecting with customers, delighting customers on the floor, and you can reinvent that role, and you can have them out in the showroom because there's less of a reliance on paperwork and all the things that might not be that person's skill set. You can offset it with technology, which is a very exciting time right now to be able to, almost like the frog DNA in Jurassic Park, you can fill it in with technology, like an Android, and be able to, because the main goal of all this stuff is to delight customers.
Yep.
And anything that we can do to, eliminate some of the other administrative stuff is ideal.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Brian and I have nerded out a little bit on this on the virtual F&I side. Brian and I connected a few months ago. We had run a study here at JM&A where we had looked at the individuals that had the highest PVRs on the virtual side. And we compared that to the traditional F&I office. And Brian did something similar on his end, and we compared notes, and we both came up with very similar findings, right? It's, the virtual side was significantly more people-oriented and extroverted, not as focused on the task at hand, and they were significantly better at listening and being a little bit more patient through the deal. So their sense of urgency wasn't as high as that of a traditional F&I individual because of the natural tendency to ask better questions and kind of get more comfortable with the customer in a virtual setting. So it's interesting to see that. And when you have that data, which Brian has and Matt's team uses to leverage, it makes the probability of putting the right person in the right seat significantly greater. It's been pretty cool to watch. Brian, what have you seen, right, from your lens as an operator leading this, as some really big watch outs or learnings that people can learn from you so they don't make similar mistakes as it relates to a transformation specifically with their people?
I mean, that could be, a 4-hour show because I'm not going to tell you 10,000 ways not to do something. I would say that it's very interesting with the ability, who you're able to recruit, retain, and how quickly we can get them up to speed. So it used to be in a traditional sense that you wanted somebody with experience, you wanted to get a veteran, you wanted to try to recruit somebody else's people because that would get you up to speed quicker. But with clarity, and then with doing a predictive index job pro, you find out what it is that you want, because what I want might be different than what the operator next door wants or what my management team wants. And that's typically where the disconnect, at least I find is what our expectations were versus what the associates' expectations were, and we weren't in alignment on that. So when you have all that in sync like a symphony orchestra and clarity of expectations, when expectations are clear, decisions are easy. And they don't have to ask questions, and they don't say, how do you want this? Because as long as we set all that stuff up, then from there, if you have the right person in the right seat with the right profile, the right mindset, the ramp up time we see in salespeople now, sometimes we have people selling 15 cars 45 days in, whereas that used to take 6 months. And then they stay there, right? And they're more consistent because we're able to figure that out. And then there's less turnover, less frustration, and it's just different, and what you're able to do with automating appraisals, automating a lot of the paperwork in F&I. When people go digital and you go paperless, you're essentially in 100% e-contracting. You're eliminating a lot of the stuff that they used to do. So now they can focus on leadership. They can focus on development. It changes the whole dynamic of the team and the whole environment of what these, instead of being managers, they become leaders. And you focus on the leadership aspect, which in turn is developing the bench, and you're raising the lid of the entire organization, which is really, everybody's making good money right now in these dealerships. And that's what they need to focus on, is the leadership aspect of it, and building a depth chart and a bench to succeed them so that you can grow the organization, acquire more stores, and everything else that goes along with it.
Matt, do you have any thoughts on that, especially around that leadership piece? Because that, to me, is, I couldn't agree more. The opportunity now for our dealer partners to double down on leadership and investment in their people is never been greater, and the return is significant, could be significantly high if they take the appropriate actions.
Yeah, I think it's mandatory because nobody can predict the future. I mean, the last 18, 24 months has proven that, and nobody knows what the economy is going to do or any other landscape you'd like to think about. So the only way through all of this change and all of this stuff, some of it asked for and some of it we're driving on our own, is going to be by having strong leaders who can lead these stores through all the different changes that we're seeing. So I feel like that's really important. Some of the risks I've seen with other types of digital transformation in the auto industry, but even beyond, is when you start looking at undermining. So now all of a sudden you see individuals who will go along on the surface, but behind the scenes, because they're still seeing a lot of risk, or they're incented in the old ways, or they're just a little bit resistant to change, or they're afraid, then they start to undermine the process. And now the best laid plans start to tatter a little bit. Or in the case of backsliding, like trying to start to use some of the older techniques to try to get the job done. You're like, this is not the way forward. So we have to be very careful that people left to their own devices, will sometimes in times of discomfort or of change will revert back to their natural style, which could be very risk averse. If you have people you've been comping them and for a long time about don't make mistakes, get it done quickly and efficiently, and then you introduce a new piece of technology, it's exactly the opposite of what they've been trained to do. So we have to be understanding of that. Otherwise, we're going to get that backslide. We're going to get that undermining, that we really just don't want to see.
And how do you become aware of those because to me, that's somewhat competing priorities and competing styles kind of in one, right? So, the dealership is moving forward to a digital transformation, meeting the customer where they are, but maybe their incentive plans aren't aligned with that transformation. And then therefore there's a competing priority around the transaction versus the long-term effect of it. And then there's an impact on styles, right? The leader may be this way, and then the other individual may be a little bit more risk adverse. How does somebody address or understand or approach that?
Pre-negotiation helps. If I understand that I'm a driving force and I really want to be a visionary and make change happen, but there's people on my team who are the exact opposite of that, then I think we need to pre-negotiate saying, well, I'm the boss. Of course, I'm going to get my way, but how am I going to interact with you from a leadership perspective? Brian, to your point, if I'm a leader, I'm going to understand what your needs are and how I can meet your needs while we achieve the bigger goal. That part's non-negotiable. We're going to hit my goal, okay? But how we do it, that's up to me as a leader. And so when I understand where you're coming from and what you're worried about, where can I flex either the job, the incentive, pad you with other team members or technology, to your point, Brian, then make it more comfortable for you to come along this journey with me. So those are types of things that if you have the awareness of the area where you have competing goals and priorities, or where you have competing styles, if you do that proactively, you've got a fighting chance. If you're going to react in the moment when things are a mess and the customer's upset and yelling, that is not the time to figure out your team dynamic. You should have done that a long time ago.
I'll give you an example of that in real life. So Wendell Hardy, our GSM, does a phenomenal job at that. And we were going through something like this last week. So we pulled everybody into the room. He said, here's where I see it going. Does everybody agree? Of course, everybody does. It's going to go from here to there. Nobody's going to dispute that, right? But the matter in which, Matt's point, how we get from here to there is really the question. So he laid it out. He said, so I'm okay if you poke holes in it in here. This is a safe zone. Because Kramer's not going to flip out or anything in here. But if after we all agree on it, and if we don't do it out there, that's absolutely not okay. So we can talk about it in here. You can poke holes in it. Tell us if there's a better way. If you see something we don't see, maybe there's something we haven't thought about, which happens all the time. But unless they trust you, they're not going to bring that up. They're just going to nod their head and just pray that it's not that painful, even though they think they're going to make less money and it's going to be more hours and it's going to be more work and all the other things. And then they think ultimately it's probably not going to work anyway, or they're going to prove to you that it's not going to work unless you have, without, and our whole management team is like that, but they mine for conflict. But unless you're, and as a leader, you got to be willing, because they tell me some stuff sometimes and I'm like, it's painful to listen to, because you think it through and you think it's going to work. And they say, yeah, but you haven't thought about this and this and this. And sometimes the best decision is not to move forward at that time. It's like Sun Tzu, the Art of War, to regroup so you can fight another day. Because if you go forward too fast without thinking it through, you lose that trust. And then the next time you try to get them to go with you, they're like, I don't know if I'm going into battle with you again after the last time, man.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So again, having the access to the data that we have at JM&A, we have found that almost 76% of automotive leaders move very similar to Brian, which is high sense of urgency, want to get things done yesterday, very focused on the customer while being flexible. And that's the value that you need in a digital transformation. The blind spot there is when you overuse those strengths, there could be some debris on the backside. And one of those debris is if we have individuals that process information a little bit slower, right? So the speed of the industry in automotive is fast. It's 30 days. Let's go. Let's make money. Let's move it forward. Quick. However, if we have individuals that are really focused on repeatable and scalable processes, they naturally are going to want to slow down, process, and think before making a decision. And if our leader is only focused on making a decision and running, what happens is we don't elevate those voices on the team, and then we just have a bunch of yes and no, or yes people, right? Which is not what you need in transformation. You need individuals that are going to challenge and have the comfort level in a safe space to challenge you. So that leader, being aware of that, needs to recognize that there are times where I need to go see Sally or Johnny 2 days after the conversation to get their insights, because they've now had time to process it. They're going to be able to poke holes in it. But if we move at 1,000,000 miles an hour, like all of us are designed to do, we could be really anchoring a decision very similar to negotiation. And that anchoring of that decision may not be the right direction for our customer or our associates. And so I think it's very critical that we understand our team dynamics to elevate voices, to poke holes, especially through a transformation. Matt, Brian, would you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. And I was that leader earlier in my career where my need was that I needed to see the big picture. I needed to understand where it was going. I needed to solve the problem in my mind. And once I did that, I was like, great, now we can move forward. Let's move forward as quickly as we can now because I understand it. But then when I was working with people who needed that level of time and the type of information, I was leaving them behind. And then all of a sudden, they either weren't staying with me or they wouldn't highlight for me things that were more detailed parts of my plan that I hadn't thought through that I could adjust if I knew it, but I just didn't know it. So only when I slowed down and started to realize that, yes, I have to meet my needs of being able to see it and understand where the vision is and all that. But then immediately when I need to take my people with me, I need to understand their needs. And if what they need to do is see it, and I say, well, why do you need to see it? It's already up in here in my head. And they're like, well, I don't live in there. I live out here, right? You're like, okay, let me take some time that I wouldn't normally do to document and show and diagram, because that gives you comfort and you need that. And as your leader, I need you. So I'm going to do something I prefer not to do, being honest, but if I'm going to take you with me, I need to do because I need to meet your needs. And then all of a sudden, things got so much easier for me when I realized that not everybody was like me. That was like a light bulb moment for me, that my team's needs were different than mine. And now later on, now I make sure to surround myself with people who complement my strengths, because that way we are a more complete team. But in so doing, I have to sign up for the fact that I have to lead them differently than I would lead myself.
And that's a stretch for you, right? Right, Brian? I imagine you do the same.
Oh yeah, I used to surround myself with people like me that, I've got Wendell, Brian Burton, Ryan Wieben, all the key managers running the departments, Cindy Lenson, my service department, are the opposite of me, because too much of me would be a nightmare for everybody. But I also, to both of your points, I can tell you as a leader, you've got to be, instead of going too fast, which is what I used to make the mistake of too, when you look around the room, is everybody good? And you go around, you can see when they look down and to the right in the avoidance that they're not bought in. And if you don't say, pump the brakes, we're not going anywhere. If we got to stay in here for another 5 hours, and that's the problem, is most people just want to check it off, cross it off the day planner. Okay, I can move on to the next thing. That task is done. And then what happens is it keeps rearing its ugly head over and over and over again. And then you're like, what happened? And Matt's talking about different ways of, you got visual, kinesthetic, auditory learners that all learn in different ways. And I had to learn that as well, is that, I'm a visual learner, so I need to see it like that in writing, and I need to sit there. And once I have it, I got it. I don't need to talk about it again. And everybody has a different version of that. Some people like to take it, hold it, take it home, look at it. And unless you know your managers like that, to make sure that they are bought in. And if they're not bought in, they won't be bought in as soon as you leave for the day. As soon as you go on vacation, the whole thing's going to come undone. I know that's what we said, but we're not doing it here. And then it causes confusion. Everybody slows down. It's an absolute nightmare. You're better off not doing it to begin with if you don't have that, at least 80% buy-in.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I'm thinking about our conversations, and it all sounds intuitive, right? These are things that we all think through and understand. It's common sense. But when the rubber hits the road, when the pressure's on, is when it becomes difficult. And I think, Brian, one of the things that I really admire and about you and Matt as well is you take a science approach to your people, right? And I think understanding the science of your people allows you then to leverage your gut instincts more effectively. And it saves you a tremendous amount of time. I'd love to hear how you leverage science and gut in this people strategy, digital strategy transformation.
Well, obviously, I'm a huge fan of predictive analytics and also cognitive speed. And knowing that about your people, I've also pushed some people earlier in my career much more than they wanted to be pushed, but because they trusted me so much and they didn't want to let me down because of what was the elements of their behavior profile, they wouldn't tell me that. They wouldn't give me the bad news and say, I don't want this for me as bad as you do. I'm like, you can sell 20 cars, let's go. And they didn't want that. They had different priorities. They had different stuff going on with work-life balance in their home, and their kids were at different ages and they needed to be there. But I just was, but you can, so let's go faster. It's not enough. There's always more. Let's rock and roll. And a lot of times they would get so frustrated, they didn't feel comfortable because they were conflict averse, pushing back and telling me, hey, that's not for me. That's not what I want. And I frustrated a lot of people, and I didn't want to hear and I didn't want to mind for hey, does this not make sense? Because that didn't make sense to me. And I was pushing people too hard and vice versa, right? So there's some people that want to be just hit right between the eyes of the 2x4. They don't want any candy coating or anything like that. And and they won't respect you unless you hit them head on. And then also looking at small groups, that floor team, internet team, our F&I team, if we had everybody exactly the same, it's a nightmare. I've done it and it doesn't work. There's a cohesive ecosystem, and there's not one right way to do it. I mean, there's multiple different ways, and there's multiple. It's like a football offense. I think if you've got a great quarterback, you structure a 5 wide out set or whatever it is, or you got a great running back, you're going to have 2 tight ends, and you're just going to run different formations. And there's no right way to win the Super Bowl. If you got a great defense or whatever, there's just, you got to look and see who the players on your team are. No different than good to great. You get them on the bus, you acquire as much talent as you possibly can, regardless of work history. Some of our most successful people, most of them came out of the hospitality industry, hotels, Starbucks, P.F. Chang's. They weren't born and raised, with a brick phone coming, out of the womb, making, cold calls. They just know how to take care of people. And I think that's a very underutilized thing that we try to figure out, okay, who can sell the most product, not who can take care of the most customers. And one, perpetuates the other.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think this is probably a pretty cool transition to show, kind of an example of how this works, right? And one of the customers that we're working with, and Brian, this kind of aligns exactly with what you described. It's what you see on the screen is this is a work style framework. And each one of these quadrants represents a work style and an understanding. And by understanding your team's strengths as well as potential opportunities, the leader of this organization is going to be much better prepared to address those conflicts, especially as it arrives or as it aligns to the objective that they're trying to achieve. And Matt, I'd love to hear your thoughts when you see an exploring team. What sticks out to you? What are some of the things that really pop off on the paper for you?
Yeah, I think what you see on a team like this is we would describe it as pretty balanced in the sense that there's people in each of the quadrants. That doesn't always happen. And it gives you a lot of variety, which is a good thing because it makes the team very flexible. But at the same time, it's a challenging team when you're the team leader, because you have to recognize there's lots of different personality types and therefore lots of different needs that have to be met. Because you have a concentration around innovation and agility, if you think about the collective of the team, it's going to tend to be a team that wants to go fast. They're going to want to change, dynamic, all the reasons that you talked about. Well, what's the implications of when we act that way for people who are in orange in this quadrant that are like, yeah, that kind of sounds like me sometimes. But what about if you're SH in the bottom left, you're like, that almost never sounds like me. I feel like I'm the caboose. Everybody's driving away from me all the time. Don't they recognize my strengths here, what I can do on this team? And my recommendation for somebody in that position is, balance, but don't block. Find a way to highlight those, the opposite of those overused strengths, bring up the details that are going to drive us into a ditch if we don't acknowledge them, but don't try to slow the train down so much that you frustrate, the team when they need to make change happen. So you got to find that sweet spot. My advice to the leaders in an innovation agility quadrant like this is to look at that person and celebrate their role on the team. Make them feel special as that balancer of saying, I'm so glad you're here to prevent us from being maniacs and like causing all these problems. Nobody knows the customer details or the back end of that process or working with that bank. Nobody can do this like you do. Thank God you're here to help us, and play such a critical role on the team. Every team member plays a very specific role, but do we celebrate them or do we just pretend they're not here? Do we just steamroll them every time? That's not a recipe for success, because if that person leaves, there's no way to fill that job role. That's going to be a disaster.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is, if we go to the next slide, you'll see, and we've leveraged this off of a lot of our data, is there are strategies that are involved in the digital transformation. And if you look at the strategy that's involved in a digital transformation, it's that of a pathfinding strategy. And what you'll see is in this pathfinding strategy is there's going to be, some areas where we're going to be really heavy, right? But there's also going to be areas where we have some potential blind spots, and mapping out the work to be done in results and discipline and process and precision are going to be as important as the vision of the project, right? And which would live in the innovation and agility. And, I think, Brian, you mentioned this in some of our conversations. Matt, you've mentioned this. Aligning the work to be done with the people that are best positioned to do that work is the number one role in a successful transformation. Brian, would you agree with that?
I would, and I'm gonna have to jump off unexpectedly, but
yes,
I don't know these the first and last names or who these people are in this team dynamic, but I can tell you by looking at this these quadrants, what I would do is if I'm having a conversation with anything as we're laying it out, I'm going to look at SH in the bottom left-hand corner. I'm going to say, what are we missing? What are we not thinking about? This sounds like a great plan. How could this go wrong? Or I'm going to ask HM, so what blind spots are we not seeing? Because I know it sounds great and it's lollipops, rainbows, and unicorns. What could go wrong if we do this? What could get disrupted along the way? And I'm going to value their opinions, especially. Then I'm going to ask CO, and how are we going to guard this process? What are the accountability measures that are going to be put into place, and how do we guard this process? And before I jump off, I'm going to transition with Troy Tidwell was commenting on digital transactions. There is and this ties right into this. We can do a whole deal from end to end, 100% digital, but the customers don't necessarily want to do that. No differently than buying AirPods or an iPad at Apple. Maybe you buy it online, you go pick it up, or you look at it and then you end up getting it home shipped. They don't care how it happens. End to end, we do 5% of our transactions today. I see that number going up, maybe 10%, but it's really not what consumers want. And it's very challenging to get to that end-to-end 100% digital transaction and getting everybody bought in. And unless you fix these things that we're talking about on these quadrants, you won't get there. Just be, like they were saying, boat anchors dragging the boat, and you won't be able to move. But once you get that done, now it's a matter of getting everybody to keep doing it because they're bought into it, not because of what the customer really wants versus what they want or what's going to make their job easier.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it, Brian. Go take care of that heater.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you later.
But this is a great time too to jump into some questions that have come in. I hate to disrupt the train. You guys have had a awesome conversation going, but we have gotten a couple questions in, and a friendly reminder to drop your questions into either the questions or the chat tab if there's something that you'd like our panel to address. But we have a question here. If we can dive a little bit deeper into leadership and empathy and our leaders' ability to empathize with people and the role that that plays in transformation.
Matt, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, empathy is one of the most critical skill sets for leaders today, because the nature of the world has really changed. And I think that getting close to our people and understanding, how they're being affected by all kinds of different things is critically important. Empathetic, so like in the quadrant that we have up on the screen, or the diagram, what you tend to find is that the teamwork and employee experience type people naturally are empathetic. They think about, how's this going to impact our people? Is everybody doing okay? They're the kind of people that walk up to you and ask, how's your day going? Like, even though they don't have to. Innovation and agility people tend to also be very relationship driven, but they're using relationships kind of as a way to say socially, how can we get this done together? So it's a little bit more externally facing, but still social. So I think people in the top hemisphere, if you will, of a quadrant like this tend to be naturally empathetic and switched on to being able to read social cues. People in the bottom hemisphere tend to be more focused on the task at hand and try to remove people from the equation to get a more rational or an empirical result, which is really important as well for certain aspects of digital transformation. So I think in terms of leadership, the first thing that you want to find out if you have somebody in a leadership position is, why do you want to lead people? It's a question that you ask before you promote. It's a question that you ask if you're hiring from the outside, because if the want to isn't there and we just say, hey, here's a top performing salesperson, let's just make them a leader. Well, that'd be great. It'd be awesome. Think about all the quota that we'll hit and all the productivity. It can be a terrible idea if they don't really want to be a leader. If they see themselves as being sort of a steward of people's career development and contribution, and they want to shape and impact people that way, that's a really great sign. Now the question is, how do we get you up to speed on what it takes? To your earlier point, Kevin, when you think about data, how do we make sure we give you the right data to be able to do the leadership function? And then how do we round you out with the right skill set to be able to use that data in pursuit of the mission? And that empathy is going to help you connect with those people. So if it sounds complicated, it is. I think it's not easy to be a leader, and it shouldn't be. But for those who can get it right, the future is theirs in terms of driving that organization forward.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would just piggyback on is that if you are task oriented, that's your superpower. Don't try to run away from that, right? Leverage your strength, leverage your superpower, use that in a way that's going to drive results. But being aware that, hey, when I first get into a situation, my first instinct is the task at hand, and then it's people. Right? Not that that's a bad thing. It's just an awareness that when I first think about a situation, I may go directly to tasks. And why that's important is because when the rubber hits the road, when the pressure's on, when it gets tight, knowing where you naturally gravitate towards can help you slow down and make sure that you do think about the other people, the individuals involved in that task, to make sure that you cause less friction or less debris from actually moving the process forward. It actually saves you time by slowing down before taking action. And the awareness of that comes from data. Just like all of us on this call, when we measure sales or we measure our sales productivity, we look at metrics, we look at numbers, and we should be able to do that with our people in a very objective, but realize there is subjectivity to any data point. And there is not one data point, whether it's our sales floor, our sales numbers, or people data, that is 100% accurate. There's always a little bit of gray in that. But knowing where to go, it just saves a bunch of time.
Yeah, and my coaching to leaders is just a little bit different. I'll make this one super quick. But when you're early in your career, you should try to be reasonably good at everything a little bit. It's kind of like, what should you know about how the store works and how the transaction works? You should know a little bit about everything. But when you're going to really excel at something, you need to go deep in your area of natural expertise. And so for a senior leader, it's like, stop trying to get better at results and discipline if you're an innovation agility person. You're already passable a little bit. You're not going to get better there. You need to go deeper in innovation agility and really feed that superpower, to your point, Kevin. So it really depends on your longevity or your stage in your career as well. That gets in there also.
Yeah. And Matt, in speaking to knowing and really leaning into your strengths as a leader, how do you best create, retain, grow a team that is balanced, knowing what your strengths are? How do you find the people that live in all the quadrants and invest in them to create a strong team?
Yeah, if I have the chance to create cross-functional teams internally, I'll purposely design them and recruit people onto my project. That's one option. The other is that if you're hiring from the outside and you have specific jobs that require people to be in all the different quadrants, the first thing you got to do is look at those job advertisements. If you have a very process and precision job, it better be a boring job description. That's not the time to play fun and games, right? But if you're trying to do innovation and agility type stuff, it better sound innovative. Like, you've got to match the job advertisement and your entire hiring approach to people who are going to be naturally suited to do that type of work. Like, the last thing you want to do is take a schmoozy approach with a process and precision person that's not going to be a good fit. And you don't want them applying to a process and precision job. So I think know what you're looking for and making sure that your entire team building strategy matches is important. Once everybody's together, celebrate everybody's strengths. You know, the superpowers, the Hall of Justice, wherever they call those crazy gatherings of super people, like, that's what you want. You want to make sure everybody gets there. Say, we're all a team and we're all necessary. We all play a role. You know, let's not look down on anybody. Let's not look past anybody. You know, that happens after you've assembled the team. These are great questions.
Yeah, I like it.
We've got some great people on the call.
There you go.
I think that we can move into our 6 obstacles, Kevin.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, and so what Matt, Brian, and I did just prior to the conversation is we really took a look at, what we see as the obstacles facing dealers today around implementing a digital transformation with their people, right? There's a tremendous amount of obstacles around technology, around partnerships. There's a whole lot of things that are involved in this that we didn't touch on, but what we focused on were the people aspect of it. And so we developed these 6 obstacles that for leaders, transformation teams, dealers, that they should use as a guide to help them understand what could be some opportunities, some blind spots that they need to prepare for. Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when these obstacles are going to present themselves throughout your transformational journey. And if Brian were here, I know one of the things that he really resonated with these obstacles when we were building these was that if he would have had this guide going through the process, how much further along he would have been, because he could have prepared for some of these obstacles that present themselves. So this is just a great tool. It's not perfect, but it gives you some framework that you can start to prepare what obstacles you may face from a people perspective as you move forward with the process. And as you see here, you can download this right now. That will give you some the access to this guide. And then I do believe as well, Amanda, that if you don't have the opportunity to download it right now or can't, this will be sent to you in a follow-up email as well.
Yes, we will send the full recording as well as links to our deck and the 6 obstacles guide in a follow-up email once the event ends.
I'll tell you what I love about it the most is that we always say every business problem is a people problem. And it turns out to be true again and again and again. And these obstacles really help to put a very fine point on the people issues that will hold back your transformation or your business performance. So if there's any aspect of the shop that's just the numbers aren't quite where they want to be, they're red or yellow when we wish they were green, that's just an indication that there's something in the people part where a little bit of data, creating some awareness, generating the insight and taking action can really help us turn that around. So I really think it does a nice job within the context of what you're being asked to do, putting that people lens on it. So it's useful for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of what we discussed today are kind of highlighted in there. And so obviously, if you have any questions about these obstacles, want to dive deeper into them, don't hesitate to reach out to JM&A or your JM&A rep. You can reach out directly to me. I know Amanda will provide some of my information as well. And, I know Matt's very big on LinkedIn. So is Brian. If you shoot Matt or Brian a note, I imagine they'll get back to you, especially referencing the obstacles.
Absolutely. And one thing that might be on your mind that is in the obstacle sheet as well talks about hybrid work. When you think about returning to the physical offices and the physical showroom versus staying remote or floating between the two, like this is very real and it's not going away. So you're going to want to make sure to get that tip sheet for that reason as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, just as a nugget, is, work in a labor shortage market when other organizations that are attracting very similar skill sets that we are attracting in our industry are offering that hybrid work environment, that's going to limit our pool. And I understand today we may not be able to deliver that, but that needs to be part of this transformation, is how can we potentially offer top talent this remote or different hybrid work experiences. And that doesn't mean that they have to work from home, right? There's a variety of different definitions when we look at hybrid. It could be hours, it could be a number of different options to it. So you have to be creative in this area of it. And one thing that excites me for dealers is the natural entrepreneurship that they have as an industry, and those tendencies to be able to create. I'm amazed at when I see some of the numbers coming out today. There are literally no cars, and somehow you guys keep selling them. So, you guys are making things out of thin air. If we put that same power behind people, I promise you're going to see the return on your effort.
Well, thank you guys so much. There have been some fantastic insights shared today, so we appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you want to have more conversations with Kevin, I will send that link through right now. It should be showing up on your screens, and he can talk to you more about how to create strong teams and advance your businesses even further by leveraging the power of your people.
Excellent. Yeah, and part of this conversation is we will provide you free access to some people data and help you better understand your current team as you prepare for that transformation.
I love it when people put Kevin to work. That's my favorite thing.
It is. I like it, Matt. Matt, thank you so much. Amanda, you're awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.